who remembers Greece of 2015? All the comrades here are very young. Even in Greece, young people have no recollection of those events. But it is extremely important session, extremely important discussion, especially today. Because if you think about it, 10 years ago in Greece, the working class of a so-called developed capitalist country could have taken power. And you know, here reformists and academics says, okay, you can have revolutions in Africa, in Asia, in poor countries because they're desperate, but this is not happening in the West. And in Greece, we were in the verge of an open revolutionary crisis, and this was only averted by the role of the leadership. And as you said at the time, Greece only shows the future developments of other countries. In one country other than another, as you start to see happening now, and we had some glimpses like the general strike in Italy, the working class is moving on that direction. The other important reason for this discussion is that Greece is really a textbook example of the role of reformism, and especially the role of left reformism, especially in particular. And we must prepare for this, comrades, because reformism and left reformism in particular will be our main opponent in the coming period in the working class movement. Left reformism and centrism. That is, people that sound like Marxist, but they're not Marxist at all. So we say that crisis in capitalism is also crisis in reformism, and that's absolutely true. You cannot have reformism without reform. It's impossible. And so one reformist after another is tested and discarded. That's why all over the world we see the fall of social democracy. Social democratic parties collapse one after another, and left parties like Syriza. Syriza was elected government in 2015, more than 36%, and now in the polls has around 3%, and will probably disappear. But we're not done with reformists. It will come again and again as they are offering an easy way out to the working class. And the workers, of course, will test one reformist after another, and will seek more and more radical solutions. But until the Bolsheviks, the revolutionary communists, are ready, reformism is not going to go away on its own. And of course, you also have, as the comrade said, you also have your own reformist mayor here. And we have to get all those lessons from the Syriza period and add them to our arsenal. And in order to fight reformism, to explain to the workers that are sympathetic to these reformist leaders what happened in Greece, what happens always with reformist leaders that try to reform capitalism. I think another interesting reasons to have the session is because in Greece we didn't have only the test of left reformism, we had the test of all main tendencies. We had the test of the Stalinists. In Greece, as you know, we have one of the few remaining Stalinist, true Stalinist communist parties. We had the test of all kinds of different sects, the Maoist, inside and outside Syriza, so-called Trotsky sects that participate in Syriza. They were very, very small, but as you will show in my lead-off, they were able to play a very disastrous role. If you give them an opportunity, they will mess up, it's for sure. So these are also very important lessons to use in all those tendencies we'll meet in front of us. Now, before we delve into the events, we have to talk about the source of these events, of this stormy period in Greek class struggle. And because the Greek bourgeoisie, also the European bourgeoisie and the imperialists, they create a myth about what happened in these days in Greece. They said, okay, what was happening there was a specific Greek phenomenon. The crisis of Greek capitalism was due to the fact that the Greeks have been living beyond their means for a whole period. You know, lazy Greeks sitting in the beach, drinking their coffee, and things like that. a huge campaign to prepare the ground to attack the Greek workers. Of course, nothing of this was true. Even then, even before the attack to the Greek working class, the Greek working class was working longer hours than the European counterpart. The Greek so-called welfare state was much smaller than the counterpart in Europe. But of course, they wanted to use this myth in order to justify to the workers of Europe that they had to smash the Greek workers. But the real reason for all those events was the crisis, the historic crisis of capitalism of 2008. That led to the breaking of the weakest link in reality, which was Greece in the context of European capitalism. But as we were telling then, Greece was showing only the future for other countries, as we see happening now with one country after another, the bourgeoisie going into a harsh attack on the workers. Now, as we explained at the time, capitalists were able to postpone the inevitable onset of the crisis through the expansion of credit. In all countries, capitalists said, you don't have money to buy a house, no worries, get a loan, and we'll find it later. But I don't have any money, no worries. We can sell the house, the price of the house are rising, you know, a party. Of course, at some point, the loans must be paid back with interest. That's the problem with this procedure. And then we have the crisis of overproduction, taking the form of crisis of debt and the banking crisis. So this started in the USA, started here with the Lehman Brothers collapse, but very quickly went all over the world and hit the weakest links first. This was the situation in Greece also. For example, in Greece, from 2001 to 2008, there was a rise in household debt of 400%, a huge rise. I remember, I'm old enough to remember that we were receiving calls in the house that were telling us, you can get a loan for a vacation and don't worry about it, we'll do this. You can get a loan for buying stuff. No worries if you don't have any money, go for it. So the problem is that at some point, as I said, monies must be paid back. And when the crisis came, loans stopped to come. The banks themselves could not borrow from the European banks and the European market. So the Greek state had to bail out the banks, giving a blank check of 28 billion euros at the time, which was a huge amount that was added to the state debt, which was also huge, 300 billion euros. And the Greek state had to pay now interest of 10% to borrow, which was unsustainable. Practically, the Greek state was bankrupt, and the Social Democratic government of Papandreou at the time asked for a bailout from the imperialists of Europe and the IMF. The imperialists were called, that intervened for the so-called bailout were called the Troika, which was the three parts, the IMF, the European Central Bank, and the European Union, the European Commission. And they intervened, and the reason they said they intervened was to help the Greek people in the hard hours they had. In reality, the reason they wanted to intervene was only to save the European banks and to save European capitalism. Because an uncontrolled bankruptcy of Greece could quickly spread out in Europe, and they tried to avoid it. Of course, this bailout had a price tag on it. It was a severe austerity with which they tried to put all the burden of the crisis on the shoulders of the Greek working class. But there was another reason they did this. They wanted to have a model in order to implement the same austerity in the working class of other countries of Europe. The attack on the working class of Greece had a devastating effect. The GDP of the country was reduced by 27%, which was a huge percentage. Average wages fell by 40%. The pensions were cut in half. Unemployment rose by 27%. And no other country in the developed capitalist world suffered such a huge reduction in GDP percentage. Only 12 countries after 1870 of the so-called developed capitalist world suffered such a huge reduction in GDP. But the 11 rest countries faced a war or a civil war. So Greece, after all this program, was like a country devastated by war. We were seeing people, old people, searching on the garbage, complete disaster for the working class. But this attack did not remain unanswered. The working class in Greece rose up again and again in a heroic movement that took many forms. And in this period, the working class could have taken power. I cannot go into the details because it's not the specific point of the talk and it will take a lot of time. But the working class struggle was derailed by their trade union leaders at the time and the leaders of the mass organizations. From 2010 to 2016, in January, where we had the last general strike, we had 44 general strikes in Greece. I mean, if you hear the American working class going to a general strike, it will be a revolutionary event. But in Greece, we had 44 general strikes, a huge mobilization, some of them very massive. We had the movement of the so-called movement of the squares, where people occupied squares in Greece. They were taking the example of the Arab Revolution at the time. And from 2012 onwards, because they were defeated in the strike movement due to the leaders, they turned to the electoral front and pick a small party of almost 4%, and they got to government within a few years. That was Syriza. This period of class struggle was a modern historic record, not only in the post-war area in the advanced capitalist world, but even in the period before, where we had revolutionary movements in Europe. Now, this was not a normal period of class struggle with just big movements. We called this period a pre-revolutionary period. And this is not to just put a label on a period, but for the Marxists, it is important to have an understanding of the different stages of development of the consciousness of the working class in order to put forward the right slogans. And we say that we had a pre-revolutionary period because the conditions put forward by the classics, Lenin and Trotsky, for what is a revolutionary period, were developing or have already matured. That was that we had a decline of the productive forces, that the ruling class was unable to govern as it did before, that we had the disillusionment of the petty bourgeoisie, and it's a tendency to look to the working class for a solution, the beginnings of a splitting in the ruling class, and finally, that the majority of the workers try to find a solution with a revolutionary action. Now, we have to ask ourselves why this pre-revolutionary period did not become an openly revolutionary one. Was it because the workers were not so advanced, they were conservative? That is the explanations the Stalinists and the reformists give, the ones responsible for the betrayal of the working class. But it was not so. The decisive reason why it did not have an openly revolutionary situation was not the background of the workers, it was the betrayal of their leaderships. This brings us to the central position of this talk, which is the decisive role of the leadership of the working class, which is, as Trotsky said, the most decisive subjective condition for the revolutionary win of the working class. When we repeatedly emphasize the importance of leadership, I'm sure you had it in your periphery also, people say, okay, every time you say the same thing, it's the leadership, the leadership, the leadership. Is leadership responsible for everything? And we have to say, okay, in a revolution, there are other conditions that are important. It's like you have, when you have two armies in a conventional war, it is important how well trained are the soldiers, what kind of equipment you have, how many soldiers you have. Those are very important factors. But who would say that the generals and the general staff is not a decisive factor? This is the same in a revolution. And as you will see in the events, the decisive role in the defeat of the Greek working class was the leadership. Now, I think there is an appropriate quote we could put in this discussion that fitting this period from Trotsky in Wither, France, that he said, "The situation is revolutionary as it can be, granted the non-revolutionary policies of the working class parties. More exactly, the situation is pre-revolutionary. In order to bring the situation in full maturity, there must be an immediate, vigorous, unremitting mobilization of the masses under the slogan of the conquest of power in the name of socialism." And such a call never came from any leadership for the Greek working class, and they were led to defeat. Syriza, after 2012, replaced the main party of the Greek working class, which was PASOK, that had this position for over 35 years. And this happened because, of course, the PASOK was in years in government, passing austerity policies. The second reason was that the Greek working class had sharply turned to the left the previous period. And lastly, the Communist Party, which was much stronger electorally and mainly organizationally and with roots in the working class movement of Greece, did not want to pose the question of power, which was the decisive factor. Now, the masses turned electorally to Syriza, but they did not do this with enthusiasm. And that is because they were skeptical from the betrayals of PASOK the previous period, and they were afraid this will come very soon from Syriza. And on the other hand, they were not really enthusiastic with Syriza's program, which was a mild left reformist program. This was reflected in the fact that we did not have the massive organizational support that we've seen in the PASOK in the 80s and 90s, where the masses participated, were organized in the thousands, and tried to actively push the leadership of PASOK to the left. Syriza, in reality, never had a massive organizational support. In reality, by 2013, they only doubled their members from since they were 4%. In 2013, they were already 26% in the elections, and they maxed out at 35,000 members. Greece has 10 to 11 million, by the way, to those who don't know. And the youth of Syriza remained only a small sect with max 3,000 members, and mostly petty bourgeois elements. And the new elements that got inside Syriza were not enthusiastic workers and youth. Mainly, they were ex-PASOK members waiting to get in the government and get in positions of the state. So, when Syriza was approaching government, as is always the case with the reformists, they started to shift even further to the right. In 2012, they got 27% of the vote, and they abandoned some of the more extreme positions they had before this result. They stopped talking about the partial cancellation of the debt. They stopped talking about the need for nationalization of the banks. They started to talk about the need for to talk with the Troika, to have negotiations. And this is absolutely normal. Now, in Syriza, there was also a left, so-called left wing, left faction. It was called the Left Platform, which consisted of a nucleus of ex-Stalinist, ex-Communist Party members, and also small organizations, mainly ex-Clifford splits. One of them was there, Internationalists Workers Left, that despite being small, played a disastrous role in the movements, in the events. We also had a small Maoist, relatively small Maoist sect that also played a disastrous role, as we will discuss in the end. It was named COE, Communist Organization of Greece, and they supported Tsipras group, which was really funny. If it was not disastrous, they really played a disaster role. Now, the left platform was not a small portion of the party. They controlled 30% of the members, which was a huge percent. And what were the political differences with Tsipras? Were they fighting for socialism? No. The main difference is that the Tsipras group, the majority, were the Euro-friendly reformists. They want to reform not only Greece, but the whole of European capitalism. And a left platform were the Eurosceptic reformists. They wanted to get out of the euro, print the Greek currency, the drachma, and start printing massively drachmas to pay the debt, pay the wages, and everything is good. Something like the Americans are doing years now, but the difference is the one is the powerful imperialist country with a strong currency, and the other is a very weak capitalist country. If they did this, if they printed drachmas to try to solve the problems, they will be printing just colored paper, and they would surely lead to hyperinflation and a new disastrous stage of Greek capitalism. So this platform also started to turn to the right. After 2012, in reality, they were the loyal opposition of Tsipras. In no Congress and no Central Committee, they presented an alternative document. They always made small amendments, and they always supported the main line of the leadership. This includes the small sects that were around the left platform. The Claphites made just corridor intrigues that they present as real politics, and they didn't present one amendment, one serious alternative to the leadership of Syriza. The only tendency that presented alternatives, that gave a fight in all this period and had clear perspectives, is our organization and our international. About that, about our international, I would suggest comrades, if some comrade is reading about those events, to go back in the website of the international and find our texts, our program of this period. There are a crystal clear analysis of what was happening and what should happen. In reality, we are the only tendency that could reread what we wrote in this period and be proud of it. All the other organizations, if they read what they were telling at the period, they will get into crisis and split. We were saying the following. The overall shift to the right of all the main leadership factions prepares an even greater shift to the right in government. Syriza leaders lack the appropriate program to face the suffocating pressure of the Troika and capital once in government. But they seem to already have a democratic alibi ready to avoid direct confrontation, the popular vote. When the moment of resounding failure of their so-called negotiation comes, the majority and left platform leaders appear willing to support a referendum. It is certain that the leadership in government will find itself between colossal opposite class pressures. The Troika will seek to demonstrate exemplary harshness in its demands to the Syriza government, sending a message to the rest of the Southern European governments, to the leadership of Podemos, and to the working class across Europe, including Germany. The Greek bourgeoisie, using controlled private media, will launch an open frenzied attack. On the other hand, the working class, encouraged by Syriza election, will mobilize to pressure the government not to retreat and to send its own message of strength to capital and the Troika. So this was us before the events, showing the superiority of Marxist analysis in comparison of opportunistic blindness and empiricism. When Syriza came to government, it would be fitting to use the quote from Engels that said there were some days in which there are condensed 20 years. This was this period condensed with heightened class struggle. Syriza won the elections in 2015, 36.3%, with huge support in the working class areas and the youth. And this represented accelerating radicalization of the workers. Now, if in the place of Syriza, who had a revolutionary party, who could have at this period the working class come to power in a very short period of time, such a party would prepare for the inevitable attack of the imperialists and the Greek bourgeoisie, which were surely kick Greek state out of the European Union. They will close the banks. The Greek capitalists will go on lockout and every kind of sabotage. And the government will be faced to nationalize the banks to avoid the fleeing of capital, nationalize the big businesses, and have a socialist plan for the economy. And moreover, they would call on the working class of Europe, but all over the world, to support the working class struggle. And very soon, socialist example of Greece will pass from one country after another. I was surprised talking at the time of Comrades of the International, not only from Europe, but all over the world, from Latin America, Asia, that they were saying in the movement in our countries, we are talking about how we can emulate the example of Syriza, because it's the first country where a movement is stepping up and showing a way out of austerity, which was global. It's not a Greek phenomenon. But of course, the betrayal of Syriza did not affect only the Greek working class, affected everybody in the world. But the bourgeoisie all over the world said, you see what happened in Greece? Don't vote for the left, don't go for the left, stay home. And that had an effect for a period. Syriza, they tried to find support in the so-called progressive bourgeoisie in Greece. Such thing, of course, does not exist. And in progressive figures all over the world. Then, here in the USA, you had Obama. You had Hollande in France and Renzi in Italy. And Syriza leaders thought that these progressive figures would help the new left government in Greece. So Syriza searched support from the Greek bourgeoisie and from American imperialism, French imperialism, and Italian imperialism, and of course, nothing came out of it. When it came to government, it formed a coalition, because it did not have absolute majority, with a right-wing party, so-called anti-austerity right-wing party. Of course, this was also a joke. And they proposed for a president of Greece a right-wing MP, Pavlopoulos. And with this, they wanted to have guarantors towards the Greek bourgeoisie and say, don't worry, we want to defend the interests of the Greek capitalists. Don't worry, we don't want to go far away. And they put their right-wing partner in the Ministry of Defense. So saying, don't worry, we won't touch the army, we won't touch the state. Everybody will be happy with these reforms we are going to pass in the next period. They continued to implement the so-called plan. What was the plan of the reformists? In which both left platform and the Tsipras were agreeing on. It was to use the threat of exiting the European Union as a leverage to press for concessions. Of course, they did not believe that they could implement real reforms. What they wanted, as it was proven by events, they wanted a mild austerity, not the crushing austerity of the memorandum. And in this way, they wanted to appease the working class, appease the Greek capitalists that they had some kind of deal, and appease the international finance system, finance capital, that the situation was stabilized and the crisis was not spread out. But of course, as you explained at the period, this was an entirely utopian plan. Some would say, no, it was not utopian. Greece was a very small economy, and there could be an intervention from European Union and IMF, and to cut the debt, to have a light austerity, it was realistic. But in reality, it was not only an economic issue in the abstract, it was a political and class issue. The so-called Troika and the capitalists, if they proceeded in cutting the debt, for example, other bigger countries like Spain, Italy, even France, that had problems with the debt, would also ask for such a measure. And the German capitalists that were mainly paying the bill were not ready to do any such thing. More importantly, if the so-called left-wing government in Greece succeeded in having light austerity, then it will send a signal that this was a way out for the working class in other countries in Europe, and we would have the rise of left-wing governments in one country after another, as you've seen with the emergence of parties and formations like Podemos, and they were not going to allow this to happen. Now, eventually we get to the point in the summer of 2015 that Tsipras is completely desperate with the so-called negotiations that got to nowhere. The Troika had promised to give money to pay the debt from February, but they withhold it until the summer, and Greece was on the verge of bankruptcy. So they proceeded in the second part of the plan, as we predicted in our perspectives document, and they proceeded in a referendum. That they were asking the question, yes or no, to the proposed memoranda, the proposed austerity of the Troika. This was the first time the leadership made a call to the masses to do something, to give a fight. And the masses responded massively. There was a heroic response by the masses, despite the fact that the bourgeoisie had a huge terror campaign in the workplaces. They were saying, if you vote for no, you will lose your job. In the media, they said, if this referendum succeeds, Greece will be destroyed, there will be an Armageddon. And of course, economically, they had the banks closed, there were capital controls, people were having lines to get money to get groceries. But this had almost no effect, comrades. There was a defined mood in every pensioner, simple workers. They said, don't care, don't care. Finally, someone is willing to fight, and we are willing to make sacrifices to change the situation. And just a few anecdotes on this period. First of all, this period, we were really on the verge of a revolutionary crisis. And you could feel it in the atmosphere. There was electricity in the atmosphere. Everybody was talking politics. Comrades were informing me that there is a Greek cafe in Brooklyn called Omonia Cafe, that when they passed at this period in front, people were shouting, no, you will vote for yes, vote for no, what will happen? This was the case in all over Greece, everywhere. I have a friend in one Greek island. It was summer then, July, okay? And, you know, Greek islands have a lot of tourism. And he was working in taverna, Greek taverna, which is a very loud place. And he said when there was a rally for the no vote, and Tsipras was going to speak, there was, for the first time in this taverna history, there was complete silence. No one was talking. Everybody was waiting to hear the next step of action from the leader, what they believed, a progressive leader. In reality, in this speech, Tsipras was preparing already to betray the working class. And I was in this rally selling the paper. People were crying on the streets. And one old lady, like 70, 60 years old, a cleaning lady, she said, finally, we have a government of our own, finally. And what can I do to help? I know the bosses, what the dirty work they're doing upstairs. Tell me who can I tell, what can I say? And I say, this is the first time I see a worker describing in her own words the need for workers' control. And she was waiting for Tsipras to say what she was going to do next. And of course, this call never came. Tsipras would not address the crowd anymore. He was already going to make a resounding victory of the Greek working class to a devastating defeat. The result of the referendum shocked everybody, mostly Tsipras. It was 61.3% no. The ruling class was really in panic. You could see in their face, and the night of the defeat, they were white, because they did not know what Tsipras would do. He could easily come into TV and say, today we pass these laws and expropriate the banks, expropriate the big businesses. And so New Democracy, the right-wing president at the time, came on TV and said, if Tsipras does not make a deal with the Troika and capitulate, the citizens of the bourgeoisie, he used these words, the citizens of the bourgeoisie will have a completely different answer. Now this was class language, this was civil war language in reality. And of course, we don't know what he really meant, but we can imagine. Use the army, use the state, use their thugs, use their lever in the economy to strangle the working class and have a revolutionary crisis coming. And recently, the current Minister of Health of New Democracy said at the time, when there was the referendum, the first thing he did was to take his family and to bring them here in USA, because he was convinced that there would be a civil war. They were preparing for such a thing. And of course, they didn't have the need to do this, because Tsipras would do the spectacular Kolotumba. It was an international war then. I mean, sudden change and defect to the enemy, defect to the bourgeoisie. In a few days, he went to the Troika and signed a much more cruel, much more severe memorandum than the one that the Greek workers voted no to. This defection was a crushing defeat for the working class. Someone can say, well, why wouldn't the workers, get out from Tsipras, vote for another left-wing party, continue to struggle, This is not how the class struggle works, comrades. After a rise in the class struggle, if there is a defeat, there is inevitably demoralization. Trotsky in the Russian Revolution, when he was describing July days and the betrayal of the social revolutionaries and the Mensheviks, said the following, that the workers running into the resistance of the bodies they want to turn over the power, the Soviets, where the leaders were the social revolutionaries and the Mensheviks, lost a clear sense of goal. From their mighty mass movement, the political axis has been torn out. And that was, of course, the same case with the Greek working class. They fought in the streets for years. They had massive general strikes. When they were betrayed by the trade union leaders, they turned to the political front. They took a small party, put to power to break with austerity. And this same party turned its guns on them and attacked them. And this completely demoralized and broke the axis of this movement. And the result was devastating. After 2015 and the betrayal of Tsipras, there was a mood of complete demoralization of the working class movement. Joined the capitalists that wrote a series of articles saying, thanks to Tsipras, that created a condition in Greece never again existed after the fall of the dictatorship in 1970. Class peace, no rallies, no nothing, no movements. 500,000 people emigrated to survive outside Greece. And the bourgeoisie was completely happy with the situation. And of course, this was also a very difficult period for the organization. In many ways, still continues to be difficult, because there was this mood of demoralization. All the students who were talking, they were thinking, okay, I will just leave Greece and go to emigrate abroad where they don't have such kind of problems. And we were fighting again against the current, all this period. Of course, the situation changes. As some of you have read, in February, we had the biggest political general strike in the history of Greece, just for one day, because the leaders never gave any continuation to this struggle. But it's a clear sign that things are changing. And we're again in the process of re-entering this period of mass struggle. We have to ask the question, okay, Tsipras was going to betray the working class, but was it possible to stop this betrayal, to stop this capitulation? And the answer was yes. Even in the last moment, there was the possibility to stop this betrayal if there was a force inside of Syriza that would fight for such a cause. And this poses the question that in reality, if only a few thousand, I described the top members of Syriza, it was 35,000 members. It's a very small number. If you had a tendency of a few thousand members, like half the percentage of the left platform, they could stop the betrayal by imposing an extraordinary Congress that would kick out Tsipras, that betrayed the working class, elect a new leadership with a social revolutionary program. And this could be done easily by the left platform, in reality, of those crucial days. If they really wanted, they could have stopped Tsipras. They could have gone into an extraordinary Congress just by having 15% of the members signing the need for a Congress. As I said before, they had 30% of the members, like half of their members, to put their names that they need the Congress. And they didn't do that. They went to the Central Committee, which, by the way, was already split and turning against Tsipras. This showed the situation in the party, that discussions in the leadership were going on, that Tsipras was thinking of leaving Syriza and creating a new party, because they thought that if he would go to a Congress, he would be expelled. In the crucial days after the betrayal of Tsipras, there was a document in the Central Committee that most of the members of the Central Committee of Syriza said they were against a memorandum. 109 out of 201 members. So the Central Committee was against the betrayal. This, of course, would be much bigger percentage in the membership. But in this crucial Central Committee that was discussing the events and the betrayal of Syriza, the left platform asked for a continuous Congress. This is a Congress in the statute of Syriza at the time that said you will have to make a Congress with the delegates of the last Congress, no discussion, and the leadership cannot change. Tsipras will remain the president of the discussion. Only we put forward the question of the need for an extraordinary Congress. And at this crucial discussion of Central Committee, the Maoist organization I told you about that was supporting Tsipras at the time, left the Central Committee. So the majority was lost for the call for a Congress. And Tsipras got his way, no Congress, no nothing. The left platform preferred to have a peaceful divorce with Tsipras. They just quit the party, make announcements we are leaving without even discussing the ranking file, trying to give a fight, nothing. And why did they do this? Why did they do this? Because they did not want to have the hot potato of a head-on collision with the bourgeoisie in Greece and in Europe. They want a small party, their positions in parliament, and they would see what happened in the next period. Of course, they were kicked out by the workers. There was hate in the working class about the role of the left platform, which participated in government. And to the last minute, the leaders of the left platform will say to the workers, there is no way Syriza will betray you. Keep supporting us, keep supporting us. So it was not only Tsipras betrayal, Syriza leadership betrayal, it was a combination of all the main tendencies inside Syriza that played a disastrous role in those events. And of course, outside of Syriza, the Communist Party also played a disastrous role in all this period, the Communist Party leadership. First of all, by not posing the question of power in the beginning. In the beginning, Syriza leadership knew workers want unity, and they posed the question of a left-wing government, and they proposed the Communist Party to be the head of this government, General Secretary of Communist Party to be Prime Minister. And the Communist Party said no. In an interview, the General Secretary at the time, called Papariga, said, even if Syriza accepts socialism, we will never participate in a government of Syriza. So the workers said, okay, this is crazy. We will vote for the smallest party and give them the percentage it took. Even in the referendum, which was for the workers a crucial battle that polarized the Greek society completely, they had the position of spoiled ballot. That is, don't participate because, Syriza is the same. He will also propose austerity. We have to choose between two kinds of austerity. In reality, if you think about it, the overwhelming majority of the Communist Party members would vote for no. So with the spoiled ballot, it was a sabotage, a strike-breaking action of the Communist Party in a serious battle. And this created a huge gulf amongst the working class masses in the Communist Party, even today. This was expressed in the elections that came in September in 2015, where the Communist Party went from 5.4% in January of 2015, and after the betrayal, which supposedly confirmed their position, they got, imagine a number, 5.5%. 0.9% growth from their confirmation. So everybody played a disastrous role. As I said, we were the only ones that can hold our head high in this period with our analysis, with our constant struggle against the position of the leadership, we produced an alternative document in the first Congress of the Unified Syriza in 2013 called the Communist Platform, which posed all of the position, what Syriza should do step by step to fight for power. We elected 2 members in the Central Committee in the party and 1 in the youth, but of course we were too small. And this is also, comrade, a very serious warning that we must build before the big events. I told you many examples how this disastrous event could be averted not only by the Syriza leadership, but a series of other leadership that played a disastrous role in the events. We must fight to grow to a level that we can exploit those opportunities and create the necessary lever to intervene in events. Now, comrades, the situation now is changing. In Greece, we are also entering in a new period, and we want to enter this new period of a heightened class struggle, not with a dozen comrades, but with 100 and 200 comrades. Probably the numbers are much higher in USA, but we're on a good road. And I'm sure that if we don't make serious mistake, and I don't think we will, it is inevitable with ups and downs to build strong revolutionary communist organizations, strong revolutionary, eventually, Bolshevik parties in the USA, in Greece, and all over the world. Comrades, long live the RCA, long live the RCI.
Communists of America is a podcast produced by our party, the Revolutionary Communists of America. If you agree with what was said in this podcast and you want to get organized, go to communistusa.org/join